Hey everyone, it's Dale from the WebPub class, and we're now going to move into responsive design. So some of y'all have already asked me, why is my site not adjusting to the size of my browser? And that's a really good question to ask, and I told you to hold off on that thought because the answer is this: it's responsive design. So far, we've been writing our HTML and our CSS under the guidelines of fixed pixel widths. So what I mean by that is when we defined our divs or defined our containers that we're putting all of our content in and we're putting our elements of the site in, we've defined how big they're going to be. So for instance, the header on my site that I'm working with right now, my little template site for this class, is 900 pixels. That means it's going to be 900 pixels no matter what size of screen you're looking at. So if I adjust my browser size here and go down to the iPhone size, you can see my header is not adjusted. It is still 900 pixels no matter what size I'm doing. So the answer for that is responsive design. And so those fixed pixel widths, they're great for people on desktops or laptops with huge screens, but they're not so good for mobile. So if you look at something on a tablet or on a phone and you don't have a responsive design, that site's going to be unusable for the reader. So we're going to walk you through the process of changing your site from static or from the fixed pixel widths to responsive, where it will now adjust to whatever size browser or whatever size screen someone is using. And there are four main elements that we're going to talk about when it comes to responsive design. The first is fluid layout. So we're going to go from thinking of elements in terms of fixed pixel widths to now percentages, which is going to help it adjust on the fly to the size of the screen. We're also going to talk about fluid images. So this is a different way of sizing images that will also adjust. I'm going to introduce the idea of media queries. And think of these as kind of breakpoints where their special rules will kick into place. This is why certain sites look totally different on your phone than they do on desktop. That's all because of media queries. It's a way to completely move your site around, move those blocks on your site around based on certain screen sizes. So we'll talk about media queries here in a little bit. And then also going to introduce the idea of Viewport, which is really just adding some code to your site that allows an iPhone to actually get the responsive site as opposed to just simply shrinking your main site. All right, so let's get started with that fluid layout portion of responsive design. And with this, again, we're going to be changing fixed pixel widths to percentages in order to make the site respond. So I'm working still out of the index.html and the style.css that I've been using for a template. So this is what it looks like once all the code is ready. And so we have everything. You notice we have all of our divs laid out with our header, our nav, our section, and our footer. And our style sheet, again, has already defined those. So now I'm going to go into here and start making these responsive. And here's where you see that fixed pixel width. We're telling the header it's going to be 900 pixels no matter what size the screen. So again, if I want to switch this down to an iPhone size, my header is not responding at all. It is 900 pixels whether I have my browser this size or whether I have my browser this size. And I want to change that. So let's just quickly change the widths of all of our IDs here to 100%. And we're not making any other changes here other than that. So 100% in the header and the nav, 100% width for the section, and then 100% width for the footer as well. I'm going to save that, and now let's refresh. And you can see the site got a lot bigger because I'm telling it to take up the whole screen. So that's obviously a problem. You don't want your site to go that big. You also notice up here we've got a problem. We also have some problems over here. If you notice this is going all the way flush, whereas the header is stopping right there. So we're going to fix all of these problems. And the first thing I want to do is I want to set a max width on all these. So I don't want it to go this far. I want it to stop at a certain point and keep that, stop responding once you get to a certain level. So I'm going to go in and add a max width on all these of 1,000 pixels. That means it will respond to anything less than 1,000 pixels, but once it hits 1,000 pixels, it's going to stop responding. So I'm adding this to all of my IDs here. I'm just trying to keep my code clean, or as clean as possible. Okay, so we've added those, and now let me refresh, and you can see it's now moved everything in, and so that's good. So if I expand my size anymore, I've got the margin set to auto, so it's going to auto center everything, but it's not expanding anymore past 1,000 pixels. And then once I get smaller than 1,000 pixels, it begins to respond. So that's fine. You can see we still have some problems. One, this is not aligning properly, so I'm going to fix that. And then we also have this problem over here of the header where this isn't working properly. So let's get first, let's fix this alignment. And the reason that's happening is because I have some padding in on my IDs here. So you'll see this padding right here that's telling it to push it 10 pixels away. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of it here as well. And I'm going to get rid of it on my footer as well. So let's get rid of both of those. And now let's see what it looks like. Okay, so now we're all lined up. But you can see we now have another problem, right? Now that I did that, I've lost some real estate here, and so now I have this maroon gap between my section and my footer. The way I can fix this is I can extend my section down a little bit by adding some padding at the bottom. So I'm going to do that, and let's see if 10 pixels will do it. So now I'm going to refresh. All right, and so now we're flush again. So I'm good to go in terms of the layout at least being aligned. I don't like this border that I have here, so I'm going to customize that really quick. And the way to get rid of that is to simply delete the border from my section ID right there. So now we're good to go. So now I need to go in and try to fix this spot right here. So let's think again about what we're doing. I've told it to go 100% up to 1,000. So now I need to go into my index and find my header. And right here, I'm going to tell it to go 100% of the header. So that should now make this image spread out to 100% of whatever we've set the width of the header to be, which we've set it at 100% of the screen up to 1,000 pixels. So let me make sure that makes sense again. We've set the width of our header and all of our IDs really to be 100% of the screen up to 1,000 pixels. So you can see here I'm more than 1,000 pixels in terms of my screen size because I have these maroon bars on the left and the right where the content has stopped responding. Then what I did is I went into the image itself in my header and I told it to fill 100% of the header no matter what size it was. So now if we move this, you see all the text is responding, and that's great. My image has not responded, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second with the fluid images. But what's the problem up here? We are now getting this gray spot again below the header, and the reason for that is because we have not defined the height yet. So in here you can see I still say that I want the header to be 70 pixels no matter what size it is. So this is 70 pixels in height. Well, the image is adjusting its width, but it can't also stay that tall or it's going to stretch out. So let's change that height from 70 pixels to auto, which tells the browser to automatically decide what size it is. and now you can see it's gotten rid of that height. So we're okay in terms of that now, and there we go. We're responsive out to 1,000 pixels, and we're good to go. So the only other thing that I don't like so far, and again, I'm just going to resize it just to see what we got. That text right here, this is going to change once we start floating the image. And I don't like that I've lost any padding over here. So the way I'm going to fix that is I want to go down to my section, and I'm going to create some definitions for the P tags inside my definition. So inside my section ID. So remember how we do that. I've got my section ID, and then I'm defining the P tag in it. So I do the curly brackets, and I want to add padding left 5 pixels and padding right 5 pixels. So what I've done is every P tag inside of this section ID is now going to have 5 pixels of padding to the left and 5 pixels of padding to the right. So we should notice a difference right here when I refresh, and there it is. So you see how it's moved over now, and it's much cleaner and nicer as well. I also don't like that the copyright is flush up against the side, so same thing there. I can now go down here and do footer and the P tag. I'm going to open up the curly brackets. Now this is going to be a little bit different because if you notice, I don't have my footer inside P tags here. So let me add those, and you're going to notice it's going to change because I've defined all the font sizes to be 10 pixels in my footer, but when I change that, it's going to default back to whatever the P tag definitions are. But I can change that. And so let's go back to our style. I want to add that padding left of 5 pixels. And now here I'm going to denote the font size to be 10 pixels. And I also want that font family of Century Gothic. So now let me save that. And there it changes it back. So again, all that did was it changed, or it defined the style for everything inside a P tag that's inside that footer ID, which that's why it's now changing, because we have a P tag inside the footer ID. Okay, so now we have all of our percentages in place. Before we move on to the fluid image portion, let's just look one more time. And I like everything except for right here. You'll notice that my image is flush against the side here, and I want to change that. So how I can do that is right here in my CSS, again, I'm inside, I'm going to define some image style here within the section. So I'm in my section ID, and then I'm defining the image within inside it. So any image inside of it. And I'm going to add the curly brackets. And I want padding left to be 5 pixels. So now I hit save and I refresh, and so now I have the change here. So let's go ahead and make it responsive one more time. So everything's good, we're all good. And again, so everything responded. The header moved down or resized, the nav resized, the text resized, and our footer resized. The one thing that didn't resize is this image right here. So let's go ahead and change that, and the way we do that is through the fluid image portion of responsive design. So I already have some code written right here, and basically all this code is style. So you'll notice we have the curly brackets. I'm telling it that I want my images to be 100%, but I'm going to put this image within this class that I'm creating. And I'm going to put that in a div, and I want that div, so again, that's just a box, that's a container. I want that container to be no wider than 30% of the screen. So again, we're telling it we want the images to be full size, 100%, but I'm going to put them within a div with a class called imgbox, and that div right there will be no bigger than 30% of the screen. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go up here, and I've already added that code here. So now I need to, let's save, and let's refresh, and you'll notice nothing's happening. So that's because we have yet to go into the code and put that div in. So right here, here's that image that we're trying to resize, right? So now I'm going to add the div, and it's a class, and it's img box, and then I'm just going to close the div around that image. So now let's save and refresh. And so nothing's happening yet, but now you see that image is slowly getting smaller, and that's also fixing our text problem, because remember, we were getting just one word because the image was staying so large. So again, I put this within a container, within a div that I classified as a img box class, and I told it I want that container to be no bigger than 30% of the screen. So you can see where that is. It's about a third of the screen, right? That's really how simple it is. So you would want to go through and add that to all of your images in order for them to respond along with the site. All right, we're in the home stretch now. Let's talk about media queries real quickly. And remember, these are basically breakpoints where we're telling it, hey, once we get to a certain size, here's what I want to happen. So if you remember from the introduction of this, this is why some mobile sites look vastly different than their desktop version, because they have gone in and set up media queries and said, if they're on an iPhone screen, I want this div here, I want this div here, I want this div here. And so all we have to do to make that happen is I have some code already written here, and this is the media query portion of it. So I'm telling it at 550 pixels, which is iPhone size, I want the navigation to shrink to about 80%, because that nav will stay at a constant size the whole time, even when it's resizing. So we want the nav to become smaller, and I also want the footer to go away. So I've opened up this curly brace here is closing it, and then I've got definitions inside there. So there's the footer one, and there's the nav size one. So now I'm going to go in and just simply add this at the bottom of my style sheet. And I'm going to save, and let's refresh. And so let's take a look. Let's keep an eye first on the footer. So let's go down to iPhone size. You can see our footer went away, so that's good. So that worked. Now let's take a look at the navigation and see if anything happened. So check the font size. It doesn't really look like anything's happening, right? The font size hasn't changed at all. And I'd like that to adjust with the rest of the screen so the font size isn't as big. So now I need to figure out why that's happening. If I go up here into my nav, everything looks correct there, but I notice right here I've defined the font size to be a certain size no matter what. So if I get rid of that, and now let's save and refresh. So you can see the font got a little bit bigger, but that's okay. I'm okay with that, because now as we begin to adjust, you see the font size just got smaller, right? So let me try to find that magic moment right here. There it was right there. So the nav is now corresponding with the responsive design, and that's what I want. So that's good. The footer goes away when I respond down to iPhone size, and the navigation font has also gotten smaller. The last thing we have to do is to add that viewport code, and this is simply just copying and pasting some code into your HTML, and it needs to go in the head somewhere. So I'll just put it right here after my style sheet attachment. And you won't notice any difference on that in terms of what it looks like with responsive design here. The thing that helps with is when you view this site on an iPhone, if I uploaded it to a server and went to that on the iPhone, that viewport code tells the iPhone to use my responsive mobile design as opposed to just simply shrinking my website and putting it on the iPhone screen. So I want it to obviously use the responsive design as opposed to simply shrinking it. So that's it, 4 steps. in order to make your site responsive. Fluid layout, fluid image, adding some media queries, and then adding that viewport code. As you've seen throughout this, you will have problems pop up. You're now at the point where you should be able to mess around with the code and figure out what's causing those problems. Do some searches. I had to look up some stuff to figure out why certain problems were happening while I was recording these demos. So Google is your friend, W3 schools are your friend, and figure these problems out on your own. Figure out how to make it look the way you want it to look. And now, not only does it look that way, it'll look that way regardless of which size screen someone is viewing the site on.